Welcome to our geochemistry class once again. So in the last class, we learned about the application of radioactive isotopes. In this class, we will take up one application in detail, that is radiometric dating. So in this particular class, we are going to do the age determination of Earth by using the radiometric dating technique. So prior to 1905, the best and most accepted age of the Earth was proposed by Lord Kelvin, that was based on amount of time necessary for the Earth to cool to its present temperature from completely liquid state. Although now we recognize lots of problems with the calculation, the age of Earth was calculated 25 million years, and that was accepted mostly by the physicists, but it was considered too short by most of geologists. So in 1896, the radioactivity was discovered. The recognition that radioactive decay of atoms occurs in the earth was important in many aspects. Recognition that radioactive decay of atoms occur in the earth was important in two respects. First, it provided another source of heat not considered by Lord Kelvin, which would mean that the cooling time would have to be much longer, as it was predicted 25 million years by Lord Kelvin. That is not the truth. Second, it provided the means by which the age of Earth could be determined independently rather than its dependency on the cooling rate of the Earth. So first we will study the principles of radiometric dating. So radioactive decay is described in terms of probability that a constituent particle of a nucleus of an atom will escape through the potential energy barrier which bonds them to the nucleus. The energy involved are so large and the nucleus is so small that physical conditions in the earth, that is pressure temperature conditions of earth, cannot affect the rate of decay. The rate of decay or decay rate or rate of change of number, that is n of particle, is proportional to the number present at any time. So dn by dt will be proportional to the number of atoms present, that is n. Because it is decreasing with respect to the time, so dn by dt must be negative. So we can write down that dn by dt equals to lambda n, where lambda is a proportionality constant. So by rearranging that equation, we can write dn by n equals to lambda dt. Now we can differentiate it from n naught to n, from time t naught to t. Or we can write as ln n by n naught equals to minus lambda t minus t naught. So if t naught equals to 0, that is the time when the process just started, then n becomes n naught e power minus lambda t. So what is n? N is in fact number of atoms at time t, and n naught is in fact the number of atoms at time t equals to 0, and lambda is the decay constant. So now we can define the half-life, that is 2 half or t half, that is time necessary for half of the atoms that were present at time t0 to decay. So we can say that n now will be equals to n naught by 2 at time t half. Thus we can rearrange this equation and we can write down at t half the n will be equals to n naught by 2. So n naught by 2 will be equals to n naught e power minus lambda t, where t is now the t half. So we can write down that ln2, negative ln2, will be equals to negative lambda t, or t half will be equals to ln2 by lambda. So now we can define this t half or tau half. In some of the literature you will see that the t half is the half-life, and in some of the literature the half-life is represented by tau half. So what is half-life? Half-life is in fact the amount of time that it takes of 1/2 of the initial amount of the parent radioactive isotope to decay to the half. Let's say that we have started from the 100% at the time 0. At first half-life, this initial amount will be decreased to the 50%, and so that the daughter element will be produced. So if we start with a 1 gram of the parent isotope, after the passage of one half-life, there will be 0.5 grams of the parent isotopes left. After the passage of two half-life, so what will happen? This will decay to half of this amount, that is to here. So if it was 0.5 grams, so after next half-life, that is after two half-lives, the amount will be 0.25 grams. And after three half-lives, the half of this will also decay and the amount will be 0.125 grams. So with the knowledge of your T half or tau half or lambda, then it would allow us to calculate the age of the material if we knew the amount of original isotope and its amount that is present today. This can only be done for carbon 14, since we know that N naught from the atmospheric ratio assumed to be constant throughout the time. For other systems, we'll have to proceed further. There are some examples of isotope systems that is used to date geologic materials. For example, we have uranium lead system, we have uranium, again another uranium lead system or thorium lead system, or we have potassium argon, argon argon, or potassium calcium systems, or we have rubidium strontium system, samarium neodymium system, and we have carbon nitrogen system. These are the parent elements and these are the daughter elements that is produced after the radioactive decay. So if we take the uranium 238 as parent isotope and lead 206 as daughter isotopes, the half-life of this decay process is 4.47 billion years. And we start with the uranium 235 and we take daughter product lead 207, then half-life of this particular process is 707 million years. Similarly, for thorium 232 and daughter element 208 lead, the half-life is 14 billion years. So these three systems can be taken up for the rocks or materials that is greater than 10 million years. Similarly, we have potassium argon system for which the half-life is 1.28 billion years and it is used to date the materials which have ages more than 10,000 years. Now we have rubidium strontium that has half-life equals to 48 billion years and it can be used to date the materials which are greater than 10 million years old. And similarly, we have this samarium neodymium and this radioactive carbon. So radioactive carbon can be used to date the materials which are more than 100 to approximately 70,000 years old. So this radiocarbon is used to date the organic material, and these particular elements, radioactive elements, they are used to date igneous and sometimes metamorphic rocks and minerals. Because the metamorphism resets the clock, so we can actually find out the last event of metamorphism on which the resetting of that particular radioactive clock has been taken place. Similarly, if we are going to date some radioactive minerals that is taken from the sedimentary rocks, we will not get the age of that sedimentary rocks, rather we will be getting the age of that mineral which came from the provenance rock. So in fact we will be getting the age of that provenance rock from which the sedimentary rock is being formed. So we have determined the half-life and average life. So how we are going to use this particular informations in order to determine the ages. So by definition we know that d equals to n naught minus n, and this information is taken from the equation first, that is n equal to n naught e power minus lambda t. So we can write down that d equals to n naught e power lambda t minus n, or n equals to n e power lambda t minus 1. So now we can calculate the age if we know the number of daughter atoms produced by decay and the number of parent atoms now they are present. So D is in fact the number of daughter atom that is produced by the decay. So D star equal to n naught minus n, where n is the initial amount and n naught is the initial amount and n is the amount at time t. So the only problem is that we know that number of daughter atoms now present and some of those may have been produced prior to the start of the clock. So let's see that how we overcome this particular problem. So when we see how to deal with this, we take a particular case. First we will take the case of rubidium strontium system. So now we will learn about the rubidium strontium system. So if we see this particular reaction, the rubidium converts into the strontium. The atomic number of rubidium is 37 and mass number is 87, and it converts into 38 Sr87 by beta decay. So what actually happens, the neutron emits from the nucleus and it converts into the proton and electron. So this electron now comes out in form of beta particles. For this decay, the decay constant is 1.42 into 10 raised power minus 11 per year, and half-life is equals to 4.8 into 10 raised power 10 years. At present, 27.85% of natural rubidium is in fact the rubidium-87. If we use this system and we go to our equation earlier we have used, so Sr87, this is daughter elements, would be equal to rubidium 87 e power lambda t minus 1. But we know that Sr at any time t equals to Sr 87 plus Sr star. So where Sr star is in fact the Sr that is not produced by radioactive decay. So the initial amount will be taken as radioactive Sr plus the strontium that is not produced by radioactive decay. So we can calculate this one by rearranging the equation. So star star will be 87 Sr at time t minus 87 Sr naught. So now we can plunge this into equation third and we can get Sr 87 t will be Sr 87 naught plus rubidium 87. So we still do not know that what is the amount of Sr naught 87. The amount of 87 Sr daughter element that was initially present. So for accounting this, first we'll note that there is an isotope of strontium, that is strontium 86. And what are the specialties of this strontium 86? That this is non-radiogenic, that is it is not produced by another radioactive decay process. And second, this is not radioactive, so it doesn't decay to any other element with respect to the time. Thus Sr86 is in fact a stable isotope and the amount of Sr86 does not change through the time, being stable isotope. So we divide the last equation by Sr86, then we can get the Sr87 by Sr86. T Sr87 upon Sr86 at time 0 and rubidium 87 by Sr86 at time t e power lambda t minus 1. And this equation is known as isochron equation for rubidium strontium system. So now we can measure the present ratios of Sr87 to Sr86 at time t and rubidium 87 to Sr86 at time t with a mass spectrometer. Thus these quantities can be determined and they are now known. The only unknowns that remains is Sr87 by Sr86 at 0 time and the time t. So note, we can see the last equation that is in form of y equals to mx plus c or mx plus b, where b is the intercept at the y axis and your SR 87 by SR 86 0, and M is the slope. So B, in fact, this V over here is SR 87 by SR 86 at time t0. So now it is also known, and the slope is in fact e power lambda t minus 1. So how we can use this? First note that at time t equals to 0, the time when SR was isotopically homogeneous, that is SR 87 by SR 86 was the same in every mineral in the rock, such as the time of crystallization of igneous rocks. In nature, however, each mineral in the rock is likely to have a different amount of rubidium 87, so that each mineral will also have a different rubidium 87 by strontium 86 ratio at the time of crystallization. Thus, once the rock has cooled to the point where diffusion of elements does not occur, the rubidium 87 in each mineral will decay to strontium 87, and each mineral will have different rubidium 87 and strontium 87 with the passage of time. So in this isochronic equation at y equals to mx plus c, we can see that is at this axis we have SR87 to SR86, and on this axis we have rubidium 87 upon SR86, and if we take this intercept, so that gives us the SR87 by SR86 at time t0, and the slope of this isochron is represented by e power lambda t minus 1. So this isochron equation can be simplified. So our isochron equation somewhat by noting that x is very small, we can expand it at e power x equals to 1 plus x power 2 by factorial 2, and similarly we can expand for number of steps. So if x is very small, these quantities are going to be smaller and smaller at every step, so we can neglect all these steps apart from these two. So we can use 1 plus x. So that e power lambda t minus 1 equals to lambda t when lambda t is very small. So by applying simplification, we get the equation like SR87 by SR86 at t equal to SR87 by SR86 at 0 plus rubidium 87 by SR86 at time t multiplied by lambda t by neglecting this one when lambda t is very small. So if we solve it, we can get the equation for time t. So that is SR87 by SR86 minus SR87 upon SR86 at time 0, and here this is SR87 by SR86 at time t, and that is divided by rubidium 87 by SR86 at time t multiplied by lambda. So the initial ratio SR87 by SR86 naught is used as geochemical treasure. For this reason, that rubidium has become distributed unequally through the earth over time. For example, the amount of rubidium in the mantle rock is generally less, that is less than 0.1 ppm. The mantle thus has low rubidium 87 to SR86 ratio and would not change its SR87 to SR86 ratio very much with the time. So crystal rocks on the other hand generally have higher amount of rubidium, usually greater than 20 ppm, and thus start out with relatively high rubidium 87 to SR86 ratio. Over this time, this result in crystal rocks having much higher strontium 87 to strontium 86 ratios than in the mantle rocks. Thus, if the mantle has SR87 by SR86, say 0.7025, the melting of mantle would produce a magma with SR87 by SR86 ratios of 0.7025, and all rocks derived from the mantle would have an initial SR87 by SR86 ratios of 0.7025. So on the other hand, If the crystal rock with Sr87 by Sr86 ratio of 0.710 melts, then the resulting magma would have Sr87 by Sr86 of 0.710, and the rock derived from the magma would have an initial Sr87 by Sr86 ratio of 0.710. So after rubidium strontium system of the previous class, in this class the first system we will take is the uranium thorium lead system. So we know that there are two isotopes of uranium and one isotope of thorium that is radioactive, and it decays to produce various isotopes of lead. So we can see the various schemes of decay of uranium. So here we have uranium 238. It decays to lead-206 by emission of alpha particles, or we can simply say by alpha decay, and the decay constant for this process is 1.551 into 10 raised power minus 10 per year, and the decay, and you can say the half-life for this decay is 4.47 into 10 raised power 9 year. If we have another isotope, that is uranium 235, it is again radioactive. So it again decays with the emission of alpha particles, 7 alpha particles, and now the daughter product is lead 207. In case of decay of uranium 238, the daughter product is lead 206, and in case of radioactive decay of uranium 235, the daughter product is lead 207. And for this particular process, the decay constant is 9.849 into 10 raised power minus 10 per year, and half-life is 0.707 into 10 raised power 9 per year. And we also know that the present ratio of uranium 235 to 238 is 1 by 137.8, and we have this third intermediate match, that is our thorium, which decays from 232 to thorium 232 by emission of 6 alpha particles, and it forms lead 208. And for this process we have the decay constant for thorium decay is 4.948 into 10 raised power minus 11 per year, or half-life is 1.4 into 10 raised power 10 per year. So because thorium 232 has a longer half-life, so generally it is not used in dating. So we know that lead-204 is in fact a stable non-radiogenic and non-radioactive isotope of the lead, and we can write down two independent isochron equations which gives the two independent dates from the uranium lead system as equation 7 and equation 8, where lead-206 by lead-204 at any time that will be equal to initial ratios of lead-206 by 204, that is at time t equals to 0 when system became closed, plus lead-2 uranium 238 by lead-204 at time t multiplied by e power lambda 238 t minus 1, and we can write another equation for another isotope of lead-207 to lead-204 at time t equals to lead-206 by 204 at time 0 plus uranium 235 by lead-204 at time t multiplied by e power lambda 235 t minus 1, and these two independent dates are same, then we can say that these dates are concordant, so they are in fact the concordia equations. We can also construct a concordia diagram which shows the values of lead isotope that would give the concordant dates. The concordia curve can be calculated by defining the following values. So this is in fact the ratio of lead 206 which is produced by the radioactive decay of uranium 238 to the uranium 238, and that can be determined by the taking the ratio of lead 206 to lead 204 at time t, negative 206 by 204 at time 0 divided by uranium 238 by lead 204 at time t. and that is going to give us the e power lambda 238T minus 1. Similarly, we can calculate the lead 207, which is produced by the radioactive decay of uranium 235 to the ratio of uranium 235 by lead 207 to 204 at time t minus lead 207 to 204 at time 0 and divided by uranium 235 to lead 204 at time t and e power lambda 235T minus 1. So now we can plug in T in this equation and we can solve for the ratios of lead 206 to 238 and lead 207 to 238, and now we can define a curve, and that curve will be known as Concordia curve or Concordia. So this is the Concordia curve. Here we have ratio of lead 206 to uranium 238, and here we have the ratio of lead 207 to uranium 235, and this is the Concordia diagram. So this Concordia is particularly useful in dating of the mineral zircon, and that has got formula ZrSiO4. Zircon has high hardness, that is roughly 7.5, which makes it resistant to the mechanical weathering, and not only to the mechanical weathering, but zircon is again much resistant to the chemical weathering as well. Zircon can also survive the metamorphism. Chemically, zircon usually contains high amount of uranium and low amount of lead. So the large amounts of radiogenic lead are produced in uranium, in a zircon mineral. The other minerals that shows these properties, they can also be dated, but they are less common. They are in fact apatite and sphene. If the zircon crystal originally crystallizes from the magma and remains a closed system, that is, there is no loss of uranium or lead from the time of crystallization to the present, then the ratios lead 206 by uranium 238 and lead 207 to uranium 235 ratios in zircon will plot on the Concordia, and age of the zircon can be determined by its position on this Concordia plot. However, if the dates are discordant, they will not fall on this Concordia plot. Sometimes, however, numerous discordant dates from the same rock will plot along a line representing the chord on the Concordia diagram. Such chords are called discordia. So these dates are not concordant to the Concordia. So these are being plotted below the Concordia diagram, and this curve, if we are going to join these points by a line, then this line will be called as discordia. The system is not always closed, so there is problem of leakage of either lead or uranium. The discordia is often interpreted by extrapolating both the ends to intersect the Concordia diagram. The older date, that is represented by T0, and it is interpreted to be the date that the system became closed at this particular time. And the younger date is T star. This is the age of an event such as metamorphism, and this particular event was responsible for the leakage of lead in the system. The lead leakage is mostly cause of discordant dates, since lead will be occupying the sites in the crystal that had suffered radiation damage as a result of uranium decay. The uranium have been stable in the crystallographic site, but the site now is occupied by the lead. So an event like metamorphism could heat the crystal to the point where the lead becomes mobile at this particular time, T star. So now even the discordia is giving us two important events. One is the time when the system became closed, and another is the time when the system became open and there was leakage of the lead. This is possibly a metamorphic event. Another possible scenario involves the leakage of uranium, again possibly as a result of any metamorphic event. A uranium leakage would cause the discordant points to plot above the Concordia, unlike below the Concordia in case of lead leakage. But again, the extrapolation of the discordia back to the 2 points wherein it intersects the Concordia. So this is the Discordia. This is plotted because of leakage of uranium, and if we extrapolate it back, then we are going to get that this particular extrapolation is going to intersect this Concordia diagram at 2 points, and it again gives two possible ages. One is T star, that represents the possible metamorphic event, and T0, it represents the initial crystallization age of the zircon. We can also define what are called lead-lead isochrons by combining the equations 7 and 8. So here we have lead 207 to the lead 204 at time t minus lead 207 to lead 204 at time 0 to the lead 206 to the lead 204 at time t minus lead 206 by lead 204 at time 0, that is equals to uranium 235 to uranium 238 multiplied by the e power lambda 235 minus 1 upon e power lambda t lambda 238t minus 1. So that is now our equation 11. Since we know that uranium 235 to uranium 238 is 1 is to 1 37.88, and assuming that PB 206 and PB 207 dates are same, then equation 11 is the equation for family of lines that have a general slope m equal to 1 upon 137.88 e power lambda 238t minus 1 upon e power lambda 235t minus 1, and these passes through the points lead 207 by 204 at time 0 and at lead 206 by 204 at time 0. So now we have these two unknown quantities, that is lead 207 by 204 at initial point and lead 206 by 204 at the time when this process of decay just started. So now we will attempt to calculate the age of the earth. So a minimum age of the earth can be obtained from the oldest known rocks on the earth, that are in fact the Acosta gneisses. They are in fact the tonolitic gneisses, and we found these rocks in northwest territories of Canada with the age of roughly 3.962 billion years plus minus 3 million years. So this gives only the minimum age of the earth. It is likely that we find a rock formed on the earth will give us true age of earth. That is not true, because if we are getting some rocks, now this rock is metamorphic in nature, and if you are getting a rock which is formed and metamorphosed, so obviously the earth would be older than the rock itself. So there is an estimate that is obtained from arguments in nuclear physics that says that uranium 235 to the uranium 238 ratio may have been one when they were formed. So we have an equation n equal to n naught e power minus lambda t. We can write uranium 235 to 238 is equal to uranium 235 naught e power lambda 235t upon uranium 238 naught e power lambda 238 t. So by solving it, we can find out the t from the equations, and that gives a result of roughly 6 billion years. So this argument tells whether the elements were formed that make up the earth, but it doesn't really gives the age of the earth. However, it gives the maximum age of the earth. From the lead-lead isochron, we can make some arguments about meteorites. First, it appears that meteorites have come from somewhere in the solar system and thus may have been formed at the same time of the solar system, and thus at the same time when Earth was formed. So here we have this lead-lead isochron equation. So this is lead 207 to 204 at time t minus lead 207 to 204 at 0 time, and it is divided by lead 206 to 204 at time t minus lead 206 to 204 at time 0, and that is equals to uranium 235 by uranium 238 e power lambda t. In this case, uranium lambda 235 T minus 1, and in this case lambda 238 T minus 1. So all of the meteorite formed at the same time and have been closed to uranium and lead since their formation. When we can use the lead-lead isochron dates of all meteorites, first however we need to know the initial ratios of lead isotopes. So once we know that, we can calculate the ages of meteorites as well. So we recognize two types of meteorites, that is Fe meteorites or iron meteorites and stony meteorites or chondritic meteorites. The Fe meteorite contains troilite, that is our FeS, and it has no uranium. Since the mineral troilite contains no uranium, so all of the lead present in the troilite is the lead virginally present, and none of it has been produced by the decay of uranium. Thus the troilite in a Fe meteorite will give us the initial ratio of lead 206 to lead 204 and lead 207 to lead 204. So now we can then determine the lead ratios in other meteorites and say that if they fall on lead-lead isochron, that passes through the initial ratios determined from the Fe meteorites. So this represents the troilite from Fe meteorites, and this represents the dates for the stony meteorites, and this is for modern sediments. So slope of this isochron is now known as geochron, and this gives the age of Earth as 4.55 plus minus 0.07 into 10 raised power 9 years. So roughly 4.5 or 4.55 billion years. So now we have determined the geochron gives us the age of Earth as 4.55 plus minus 0.07 into 10 raised power 9 years. So is this the age of Earth? So lunar rocks also lie on the geochron, at least suggesting that moon formed at the same time as meteorites. The modern oceanic lead, that is lead separated from continents and thus form average crust, also plots on the geochron, and that suggests that the Earth formed at the same time as meteorites and as the moons. Thus, our best estimate of age of Earth is 4.55 billion years. So now, together with rubidium strontium and uranium thorium lead dating systems, we have other dating methods as well. Now we will take up some of them. So now we will learn the samarium neodymium dates. So in samarium neodymium system, we have the conversion of radioactive samarium 147 to neodymium 143, and the lambda for this particular reaction, that is decay constant, is 6.54 into 10 raised power minus 12 per year, and half-life of this particular decay is 1.06 into 10 raised power 11 year. So we have one non-radiogenic isotope of neodymium, that is neodymium 144, that is stable in nature. So now we can write down the isochron equation. So we have neodymium 143 by neodymium 144 at time t, that is equals to, and the neodymium 143 to 144 at time 0 plus neodymium samarium 147 to neodymium 144 at time t e power lambda t minus 1. So this isochron equation is applied just like as rubidium strontium system we have done in our earlier class. So by determining the neodymium 143 to 144 and samarium 147 to 144 ratios on several minerals with mass spectrometers, and then from slope we can determine the age of the rock. The initial ratios have particular importance for studying the chemical evolution of Earth's mantle and crust, as we have discussed in earlier sections that the ratios of the samarium and neodymium changes in different conditions like in mantle and in crust. Potassium argon dating. Potassium is radioactive isotope, that is potassium 40 is radioactive isotope of potassium. It makes up 0.119% of natural potassium. Since potassium is one of the 10 most abundant elements in the Earth's crust, the decay of K40 is important in dating the rocks. K40 decays in two ways. The one branch decays as K42 calcium 40, another branch decays K42 argon 40. So we are going to see the first ones first. So K40 decays to the calcium 40 by beta decay, and 89% of this decay occurs by this branch itself. But this scheme is not useful because calcium 40 can be present both as radiogenic and non-radiogenic calcium. So now we use this branch where we have the 40 potassium decays to the 40 argon by electron capture. For this combined process, we have the decay constant equals to 5.305 into 10 raised power minus 10 per year, and half-life is 1.31 into 10 raised power 9 year. And for the argon branch, we have decay constant, that is lambda is equal to 0.585 into 10 raised power minus 10 per year. Since the argon is a noble gas, it can escape from the magma or liquid easily, and is thus assumed that there is no argon 40 present initially. Note that this is not always true. If the magma cools quickly on the surface of Earth, some of the argon may be trapped, and if this happens, then the date obtained will be older than the date at which the magma erupted. For example, the lavas dated by potassium argon that has historic age usually show 1 to 2 million year old ages due to trapped argon. Such trapped argon is not problematic when the age of rock is in hundreds of millions year, because now the error of 1 or 2 million year in billions of year or hundreds of million year is negligible. So the dating equation for potassium argon dating is Ar40 is equals to lambda E by lambda 40k e power lambda t minus 1, where lambda E upon lambda is 0.11, and that refers to the fraction of potassium that decays to the argon. So there are certain problems that are associated with potassium argon again dating, and those problems are excess argon, atmospheric argon, and metamorphism and alteration. So now we will deal with these problems one by one. The problem of excess argon, we will discuss the first. This is only a problem when we are dating very young rocks. In dating whole rock instead of mineral separates. The mineral should not contain any excess argon, because argon should not enter the crystal structure of a mineral when it crystallizes. Thus, it is always better to date minerals that have high potassium content, such as cyanidine or biotite. If these are not present, plagioclase or hornblende can also be dated. If none of these are present, then only alternative is to date the whole rocks rather than dating a simple or single mineral, because that can give the problem of excess argon. So now we have another problem associated with potassium argon dating is atmospheric argon. So argon 40 is present in the atmosphere, and it has built up due to the volcanic eruptions. Some of the 40 argon could absorb onto the surface samples, and this correction is also needed to be done while dating with potassium argon technique. Metamorphism or alteration is another problem associated with this potassium argon dating. So most minerals, they lose argon on heating above 300 degrees Celsius. So the metamorphism can cause the loss of argon or a partial loss of argon. Either the loss may be complete or partial, and this is going to reset the atomic clock. If only partial loss of argon occurs, then the age determined will be in between the age of crystallization and age of metamorphism. If complete loss of argon occurs during the metamorphism, then the date is the age of metamorphic event. The problem is that there is no way of knowing whether or not partial or complete loss of argon has occurred. So we have C14 carbon dating. So radiocarbon dating is different than other methods of dating because it cannot be used directly to date rocks, but it can only be used to date organic materials produced by once living organisms. So 14C is continuously being produced in the Earth's upper atmosphere by bombardment of these N14 atoms by cosmic rays. Thus the ratio of C14 to N14 in the Earth's atmosphere is constant. So if we have bombardment of cosmic radiation onto the nitrogen 14, we have production of this carbon-14, and this ratio remains constant. Living organisms continuously exchange carbon and nitrogen with the atmosphere by breathing, feeding, and photosynthesis. Thus, so long as the organism is alive, it will have some ratio of carbon-14 to nitrogen-14 as the atmosphere. When the organism dies, the carbon-14 decays back to nitrogen-14 with a half-life of 5730 years. Measuring the amount of C14 in this dead material thus enables the determination of time elapsed since the organism died. So radiocarbon dates are obtained from things such as bones, teeth, charcoal, fossilized woods, and shells of the organisms. Because the short half-life of carbon-14, it is used to date the minerals that are materials that are younger than 70,000 years. There are some other uses of isotopes. The radioactivity is an important heat source in the earth. Elements like potassium, uranium, thorium, rubidium. It occurs in quantities that are large enough to release substantial amount of heat through radioactive decay. Thus, radioactive isotopes have potential as fuel for such processes as mountain building, convection in the mantle to derive plate tectonics, and convection in the core to produce Earth's magnetic field. The initial isotopic ratios are useful as geochemical tracers. Such tracers can be used to determine the origin of magma and the chemical evolution of the Earth. Short-lived isotopes made during the nucleosynthesis that have nearly completely decayed away can give the information on the time elapsed between the nucleosynthesis and Earth's formation. So, what is the nucleosynthesis? The universe is if 1 minute old and antimatter has been destroyed by annihilation with matter. The leftover matter is in form of electrons, protons, and neutrons. As the temperature continues to drop, protons and neutrons can undergo fusion to form heavier atomic nuclei, and this particular process is called nucleosynthesis. So when the proton, neutron, electron were in the form of mixture, specifically when the universe started to evolve, as the temperature dropped, these can join to form different atoms or elements. This process is called as nucleosynthesis. So short-lived isotopes can give information about time elapsed between the nucleosynthesis and Earth's formation. The ratios of stable low mass isotopes like oxygen, sulfur, carbon, and hydrogen can be used as tracer as well as geothermometers, since fractionation of light isotopes can take place as a result of chemical processes. Thus, we can use these ratios to light isotopes to shed light on the processes of temperature of past events and paleoclimatic studies as well. The radioactivity is source of energy, so it can be exploited for human use, and that use may be good, like in the production of electricity in nuclear plants, or bad as in form of atomic bombs. These are the references utilized to make this lecture. So in this class we studied about the uranium thorium lead dating system, the potassium argon, samarium neodymium, and we have studied about radiocarbon dating methods, and also we have studied in brief about the application of these isotopes. You can feel free to ask any question regarding this question. Thank you. Jai Hind.